David Glenn Lewis. David Glenn Lewis, born in 1953 in Borrego, Texas, was the youngest of 2 children. He graduated from high school in 1972 and went on to attend Texas Tech University, where he excelled academically. David earned a degree in political science before obtaining his doctorate in jurisprudence from Texas Tech University Law School in 1979. With his law degree, he became a member of the American Bar Association and began practicing law in Amarillo, Texas. During his time in law school, David married Karen, and the couple later had a daughter together in 1981. David's early career as a lawyer was promising, with his strong academic background and dedication to his profession shaping his future. From all outward appearances, David was a family man who never his paternal and civic duties. He volunteered for various charities, was a Sunday school teacher at the church he attended weekly, a member of the Dumas Community Education Advisory Council, and was involved in the Boy Scouts of America as a district chairman. In late January of 1993, in preparation for Super Bowl weekend that was about to occur, David's wife and daughter took a trip from their home in Amarillo, Texas to the metropolis of Dallas, a 365-mile journey for a girls' weekend of shopping. They departed Amarillo on the January 28th, leaving David at home alone. Little did they know this would be the last time they ever saw their beloved and cherished David, husband and father, alive. On the January 31st, which was the actual day of the Super Bowl trip and the day that Karen and her daughter returned home, they walked in to find the TV still recording the football game long after the match had ended, as well as fresh food in the fridge. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. David's wedding ring and his watch had been set on the kitchen counter, but David was nowhere to be seen. It has been discussed in the media that the TV recording machine David used, presumably a VHS, was not one that capable of recording on a preset function, meaning that he would still have to press record when wanting to start the tape recording of the game. Because the tape was still recording the subsequent television programming when his wife and child got home, the idea that his VCR was a manual one and not an automatic one is supported. The house was calm and quiet with no signs of a struggle, or anything missing or disturbed. Thinking David had left to watch the game from another household or that he may have slipped out to do some errands, his wife and daughter initially thought nothing of his absence. However, by the morning of February 1st, with still no sign of David, his wife became increasingly worried. She then called Amarillo Police Department to report her husband missing. That night, unbeknownst to David's wife, a body would be found some 1,600 miles away. At 10:30 p.m. in Yakima County, Washington, several people spotted an individual on Route 24 near Moxie, several miles from Yakima Airport. That person was reported to be either walking in the middle of the road or lying by the side of the road, but was a hazard either way. So much so that the people in the car that witnessed this turned around on the road to head back the opposite way to warn incoming motorists of the danger to both themselves and the wayward man. But when the driver came back after warning the approaching motorists, he found the man already dead. The deceased man was middle-aged and dressed in military-style clothing and was wearing work boots. The man had been struck head-on by a vehicle who, understandably, didn't see him in the position he was on the road, but in a callous act of inhumanity fled the scene. A Chevrolet Camaro was seen speeding away around the time he was struck. Lacking any traces of the usual drugs tested for in his system and with no alcohol in his blood, police were flummoxed in regards to why this man was wandering on a dark road late at night. With no idea on his person, the police had no idea what had happened. Meanwhile, back in Amarillo, on the 2nd February, the investigation into David's disappearance takes a turn when his car is found. The red Ford Explorer was located outside of the Potter County Courthouse in downtown Amarillo. Under a mat on the floor, detectives found David's house key and car keys. His checkbook, credit cards and driver's license were all located inside the car in David's normal storage areas. Back at home, Detectives would continue to puzzle over the fact that David's wedding ring was set out at home and that all of his normal items that David would usually bring along with him on any outing were accounted for. If they were at home, then where was David? Upon further interviews with David's wife, Karen, she revealed that he had cryptically told her that his life was in danger. He wouldn't, however, tell his wife any information about the threats he believed to be on his life or what the cause of the danger was. When the police looked into the days before David went missing, they found that on January 28th, David left his law firm, Buckner, Lara and Swindle at around noon. He told his co-workers that he wasn't feeling well and was going home. Shortly after, his credit card was used to pay for gas. Even though he had stated that he wasn't feeling well, he taught a government class at Amarillo College until 10 p.m. that night. The next day, on January 29th, one of his friends claimed to have seen David hurrying through the Southwest Airlines terminal at Amarillo International Airport, and he wasn't carrying any luggage with him at the time. On that same night at around 10:30 p.m., a police officer claimed to have seen David's red Ford Explorer parked outside the Potter County Courts building. However, the vehicle was not there the next day. On January 30th, someone deposited $5,000 into David's joint bank account. A neighbor claimed to have seen the Ford Explorer at his house on that day. The next day, on January 31st, a sheriff's deputy saw the Ford Explorer parked outside the Potter County Courts building again, and a man resembling David was standing across the street from the courts building. The man seemed to be taking pictures of the vehicle. On the February 1st, a cab driver claimed to have driven someone who resembled David from a hotel to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. The driver said the man seemed very nervous and fumbled while paying in cash. David's family believes that his job as an attorney may have contributed to his untimely demise. They postulate that perhaps a past client that was unhappy with his work on their case, or maybe even a rival from David's professional life that he had made angry or jealous. Of course, David didn't win every case he tried as a lawyer, and perhaps a verdict that was unfavorable led to someone seeking out revenge. More specifically, David was meant to be in Dallas 1 week after his disappearance. He was set to give a deposition as witness to a conflict of interest case between himself, his former law firm and one of their wealthy ex-clients. In a conversation he'd had with his father before his mysterious disappearance, David had said that he had no plans to help cover up any wrongdoings on the part of his former firm and told his father that his plan was to, quote, tell the truth, whoever it hurts. While this idea of David being in danger was promising for investigators in terms of motive, those leads led to nowhere. One concrete piece of evidence detectives did find was puzzling. It was 2 plane tickets purchased in David's name around the time of his disappearance. The initial ticket they found was purchased on January 31st and had David scheduled to fly from Dallas to Amarillo. Detectives couldn't discern if this ticket was related to the same journey that David's wife and daughter had made on the exact same day as they too went from Dallas to Amarillo. It's unclear how David's wife and daughter traveled, whether it was by plane, train, or automobile, but his wife stated that they didn't ever have plans for David to accompany them, as the main reason they were getting away was for him to enjoy the Super Bowl. The day this ticket was bought was the same day his wife and daughter returned home to an empty house. The second ticket was purchased 1 day later on February 1st and was a ticket from Los Angeles International Airport to Dallas. This is the same day that the body of a John Doe was discovered in Washington. It's unclear if any of the plane tickets had actually been used or had been attempted to be used. The true meaning or motivation behind these 2 tickets is unknown. If David did intend to use the plane tickets, how? How did he plan on getting from Amarillo to Dallas, which was roughly the distance of San Francisco to LA at almost 6 hours by car, so that he could then use the plane ticket which would take him from Dallas back to Amarillo? Detectives briefly wondered if David had some intention to meet up with his wife and daughters, some sort of surprise, but as his wife had asserted, no such plan was discussed. David's disappearance was closed after 7 months with no new developments. In 2002, the police department made a statement that they believed that, based on the fact that he had purchased plane tickets, that his leaving was voluntary and that no foul play was suspected. They believe that David voluntarily walked away from his life in Amarillo and disappeared into the night off the grid. 2003 marked 10 years since a John Doe was discovered wandering the road on the day after the Cowboys win against the Bills at the 1993 Super Bowl. Nearly a decade after David's disappearance, Washington Patrol detective Pat Ditter was reading a newspaper series called Without a Trace, which was about missing persons cases that had gone cold. Ditter, a consummate detective, learned more about the main impediments to positive identification and closer and missing persons investigations. Particularly, Ditter read about the deep flaws of the NSIC's, the National Crime Information Center's, computer system at that time. Motivated by the potentiality that the answers were already waiting just ready to be cataloged, cross-referenced and shared, Ditter decided to use what seems to have become the best friend to real-life detectives and armchair investigators alike, Google. Starting with the pretense that the information needed to find these missing persons had actually just fallen through the cracks of computer databases, Ditter utilized the power of Google by inputting characteristics of roughly a dozen unidentified bodies in the hope of finding missing persons cases that matched their physical descriptions. Only a week after Ditter first began to look up descriptions of unknown victims, a potential hit. The Yakima County, Washington John Doe that had been found the night after the Super Bowl under more than unusual circumstances was linked through the keywords of his phenotypical descriptions to a man missing out of Dallas, Texas. All of this information was found under the Doe Network, a database created in hopes of bringing closure to families worldwide. On the website's search results and a display of various images of those who might be a potential match based on keywords, one caught Ditter's eye in particular. The picture of David Glenn Lewis of Amarillo, Texas was extraordinarily similar to the one Ditter had of the John Doe found in the dark road the night after the Super Bowl. The only difference from the picture of David in comparison to the one of the man found deceased was that the unnamed man found in the road was not wearing the usual eyeglasses David always wore. But sure enough, in looking at the catalog of contents found with the body, they had listed a pair of eyeglasses. Sure that there was more to this case than mere coincidence, Ditter contacted investigators in Amarillo and sent them a few items found on the John Doe from Washington that could be used to positively identify him. One of the items was the military-style work boots David was wearing, the other was a preserved tissue sample from the deceased. In October of 2004, using DNA provided by David's mother, Esther, they were able to match the two cases definitively. 11 years after his mysterious disappearance, family man and attorney David Glenn Lewis was positively identified as the deceased man found on Route 24, 1,600 miles from his home. Although the victim that had been killed in the hit and run would finally have a name, that seemed to be the only thing that was certain and straightforward about this case. It is unknown why David would have headed to Washington, and neither friends nor family have been able to offer any insight into a link that he may have had to the area. While the John Doe was finally given a real name, David Glenn Lewis, the realization brought about more questions than it did answers. Why was this established family man, set to have a calm weekend of football and leisure, found wandering the dark roads of a Washington highway? With no traces of alcohol and the normal talk screen coming up clean, what was an educated father doing on the side of a road? Had he made plans to meet someone in Washington? Had he been lured there by whomever he believed was trying to hurt him? And what was with the military-style clothing? David's wife and mother attested to the fact that David had no military ties, nor did he own, or have reason to own, any military clothing. His wife was sure that neither the clothes nor the shoes David was wearing were actually from his home. Ditter believes David's death on the road in Yakima County may have been an accident rather than a suicide. But even if that is true, why did he disappear to begin with? David Glenn Lewis was a man with a promising future, a devoted husband, father, and active member of his community. His disappearance in 1984 shocked everyone who knew him. Leaving his wedding ring on the counter at home, David seemingly vanished without a trace. His reappearance, 1,600 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just days later was equally mysterious. He was found disoriented, unable to explain how he had gotten there or what had happened to him during his absence. Sadly, only days after being found, David met his untimely death in what many believed was a suspicious manner. While no clear answers have surfaced over the years, David's case remains surrounded by unanswered questions. His sudden disappearance, confused reappearance, and tragic end have left his family and community desperate for answers. Despite ongoing efforts, no new leads have been uncovered, but investigators continue to hope that someone, somewhere, might hold a piece of information that could finally provide closure to this chilling mystery. Moving on to the next case. Frederick Valentik. Over 40 years ago, a young pilot named Frederick Valentik, flying a Cessna 182L, was en route to King Island when he became part of one of the most intriguing mysteries in aviation history. After reporting to Steve Rui on the flight service radio, Valentik's flight would end in an unexplained disappearance, placing him among the 20 known cases of pilots encountering the unknown. At just 20 years old, Frederick was an experienced member of the Air Training Corps and had held his private pilot's license for just over a year. He lived with his parents, and by all accounts was a fine young man with no serious problems and was happily pursuing his career of choice. One day on October 18, 1978, he showed up at Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne to hire a plane in order to fly out to King Island, a round trip of some 560 kilometers, about 3.5 hours worth of flight time. He was turned away due to bad weather over the ocean. 3 days later, he returned to try again and this time got his plane, a single-engine Cessna. He took off at about 6:15 p.m. in the evening of October 21, 1978 for what would be his first and only night flight over water. The weather was good, visibility excellent, with scattered clouds and light winds. King Island is about halfway between the main island of Tasmania and mainland Australia. To fly there from Melbourne, you typically don't fly in a straight line because that would mean you're over water nearly the entire way. And flying over water is riskier than flying over land. So pilots typically go from Melbourne, southwest along the coast, to Cape Otway, which is the closest point on the mainland to King Island. This longer route is mostly overland. However, even the safest route includes a stretch of 85 straight kilometers over water. Frederick's flight proceeded uneventfully. About 20 minutes after sunset, he turned away from the coast at an altitude of 4,500 feet and began the long stretch over water. At a little after 7 or 6 p.m., Frederick Valentik made a radio contact with the air traffic controllers in Melbourne to inquire if there were any other aircraft known to be flying in the area. The answer from Melbourne was no, an answer that was confirmed again during the odd communication that followed. Recordings of the actual radio conversation do exist, but for some reason, I couldn't find the real recordings. However, the transcript of the conversation is still available, and based on that there have been several reenactments. His final transmission was at 7:12 p.m. Some sources claim that the exchange went on after this, and that Valentik said his Cessna was engulfed in a green light and he was burning. However, I couldn't find any proof to this. At the end of the transmission, there's a loud noise like metal scraping on metal. Although an intensive air, land and sea search was carried out until October 25th, no trace of Cessna or Frederick was found. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation released its findings in May 1982 stating that the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined, but the outcome was presumed fatal. Interestingly, there appears to have been UFO and strange light sightings in the Kings Island and Bay Street area on the night that Frederick Valentik disappeared. There also may have been sightings both in the weeks before and after the event. The number of reported UFO sightings in the area range anywhere between 1150. At this point, the information has become so convoluted that it would be nearly impossible to come up with a definite number of sightings. To understand what happened, we need to look more closely at Frederick Valentik himself. Frederick Valentik was a 20-year-old inexperienced flyer with only about 150 total hours of flying time and a Class 4 instrument rating, which meant he could operate at night but only in visual meteorological conditions. He had twice been rejected by the Royal Australian Air Force due to inadequate education. Having obtained a private pilot's license in September 1977, he was studying part-time for a commercial pilot's license. Unfortunately, He had failed all 5 of his exam subjects, not once but twice, and just a month before again failed 3 subjects. Further, his involvement in 3 flying incidents came to the attention of officials. Once he received a warning for having strayed into restricted airspace, and twice he was cited for deliberately flying blindly into a cloud, for which he was under threat of prosecution. In brief, Valentik may have been an accident waiting to happen. Moreover, the young pilot was enthralled with UFOs, watching films and accumulating articles on the topic. Earlier that year, according to his father, Valentik had himself observed a UFO moving away very fast, and he had expressed to his father his worry about what would happen if such presumed extraterrestrial craft should ever attack. Several theories have been set forth regarding the disappearance of Frederick Valentik. All of them are rooted in some truth, though all are speculations as we cannot verify what happened to Valentik that night. One theory is that Valentik committed suicide but wanted to go out with a bang. There is nothing to suggest this. Frederick was a well-adjusted young man. He had a girlfriend. There was no problem there. He wasn't suffering from depression, and he got well with the family. There is absolutely no reason to believe that Frederick Valentik wanted to die. Another theory is that he was either killed or taken by aliens. There is no way to prove or disprove that suggestion. Another is that Frederick's engine troubles came from interference from the unidentified flying object. Again, this is yet another theory that cannot be proven, but it is supported by the fact that Valentik reported engine trouble during his encounter with it. However, this is hardly evidence of the truth of the theory. And lastly, there's this theory that Frederick was playing an elaborate practical joke, yet his father later said that Valentik would have taken such a thing very seriously. But upon my research, I found a few things that made me look further into this theory. First is that Frederick lied to everyone about why he was going to the King Island. He told flight officials that he was picking up passengers, but there were no passengers there to be picked up. He told his family and girlfriend that he was going to pick up crayfish, but there were no crayfish available on the island. He'd even told his girlfriend he'd be back by 7:30 p.m., which was clearly impossible. Neither story was true. And secondly, Valentik had not even followed standard procedure to inform King Island Airport of his intent to land there. Frederick knew he would arrive well after the dark, and he knew that the airstrip on King Island was uncontrolled, meaning it had no control tower and nobody on the radio. He would have had to call in advance to have the runaway lights turned on, and he should have known this, but he never made such a call. So what was Valentik really up to? Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released in 1977, 1 year before Frederick's disappearance. The movie was a favorite among UFO fans and ignited an intense community interest in UFOs and the potential of extraterrestrial life. Frederick seemed to have emulated every major element in that movie scene. Does that mean he was trying to replicate the famous movie scene and in the process possibly starving his carburetors and crashing into ocean? Given his fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrials, it's a likely possibility. But there is absolutely no way to know that for sure, as these are just theories and speculations. Frederick Valentik may very well have encountered a UFO. While it's impossible to definitively link the unidentified flying object to Frederick Valentik's disappearance, the most plausible explanation is that he experienced engine failure and crashed into the ocean. His plane, along with possibly his remains, may still be lost beneath the waves to this day. Moving on to the next case. Louis Massa. In December 2016, 64-year-old Louis Massa was found dead in front of his car on his driveway in Terrell Road, Orange County, Florida. He had suffered blunt force trauma, with the cause of death being a blow to the head from a large lawn ornament. The circumstances surrounding his death remain unclear, and the case has yet to be solved. It is believed that someone attacked him in what may have been a targeted or opportunistic act of violence, but the identity of the perpetrator remains unknown. Some of his rings and phone had been stolen. There was also a broken window in his house. This made investigators believe had Louis interrupted the burglary. Neighbors told investigators had a man jump the fence after triggering the house alarm just before police arrived on the scene. Witnesses helped investigators create the composite sketch, Investigators also found that another burglary took place less than a mile from Lewis's home, a few days before his life was taken. Fingerprints were collected at crime scene. Recently, these fingerprints were tested to see if it matches anyone in a Cody's database. This led investigators to Devon Hill. When questioned, he admitted had he took Lewis's life. He was arrested on January 29, 2021. He is currently being held in Orange County Jail, without bond. Moving on to the next case. Harold Wayne Lovell. Harold Wayne Lovell, a troubled 19-year-old in 1977, is an example of how cold cases can sometimes remain unsolved for decades before being resolved. While many cold cases are solved thanks to advancements in forensic evidence, particularly DNA testing, there are cases like Lovell's where the path to resolution may involve piecing together new clues or revisiting old ones. Even though solving such cases often brings families closure, it also means revisiting painful memories during hearings or trials. The evolution of forensic technology, particularly in DNA analysis, has made it possible to solve many cold cases that once seemed hopeless. He lived in Chicago with his parents and two siblings. In May 1977, he had an argument with his mother and decided to leave home. Harold told his family he was going to look for a construction job, which he did. He left behind his mother, his stepfather, brother Tim, and sister Teresa. His family didn't hear back from him after he left, and he never returned, so they got worried about him. They got even more worried about Harold when they heard about John Wayne Gacy. Gacy entered the lives of 33 young boys and men in the 1970s. K.C. was arrested in 1978. K.C. also worked at construction sites during that time and in the same area. He buried lots of victims under his house. 8 of the bodies found under Gacy's Chicago home was not positively identified. In 2011, the police asked all families who believe they are related to one of the 8 unknown victims to come forward and send in their DNA. Howard's 2 siblings, Tim and Teresa, sent in their DNA since they strongly believed Howard was one of the 8 victims. The DNA did not help solve this case. Before the test could be complete, there was a shocking revelation made. Tim and Teresa's nephew found a mugshot on mugshots.com of a person with the name Harold Wayne Lovell. The photo was of a man from Florida who was arrested in 2006 for possessing marijuana. The family quickly tracked Howard down in Florida. Howard immediately came to visit his family. He told them that he did go to work on construction sites, and believe it or not, but he did work with John Wayne Gacy for a while. Howard used to work in Gacy's garden every now and then. Gacy always tried to get him to come inside the house, but Howard always said no, because something felt wrong. Howard was sad to learn that his family thought he was not alive anymore. He never contacted them because he was under the impression they didn't care about him and wouldn't miss him at all. Howard had a few run-ins with the police, one of them resulting in a mugshot that led to him being found. While he was gone, he married and moved to Wisconsin. But when he got divorced, he decided to move to Florida. Howard's brother had this to say: "I always had that inkling of hope he was alive. I would say, God, let me see my brother one more time." Moving on to the next case. Leslie Prieur. Leslie Prieur, a 49-year-old woman from Chevy Chase, Washington, D.C., was living a happy and fulfilling life. On May 2, 2001, she said goodbye to her husband, who left for work early in the morning. Leslie then began her preparations for her day at her job with the popular advertising firm, Specialties Incorporated. Known for her punctuality, Leslie was always reliable and never missed a shift. However, on this particular day, she failed to show up for work, which raised immediate concern. This was completely out of character for her. If she needed time off, she always notified her boss. If she was ill, she would always call. Her boss decided to contact Leslie's husband Carl, who said he had no idea where Leslie was. Concerned, Carl and Leslie's boss then decided to check on Leslie at her home. Upon arriving at the house, they knocked at the door with no response. Calling out Leslie's name, they were met with silence. Upon entering, they were met with a horrifying sight. There was blood spattered and smeared on the walls in the foyer. In the corner by the door, dried blood marred the floor next to a puddle of water. An overturned table lay nearby and a rug, also stained with dried blood, had been moved from the foyer into the living room. Calling out his wife's name, Carl was met with an eerie silence. The two men immediately called the police. Police quickly arrived on scene only to make a gruesome discovery upstairs. Police found Leslie Prieur dead in her bedroom. A detective later told a reporter it was a pretty brutal crime scene. An autopsy revealed that Leslie had been brutally beaten, suffering multiple blunt force traumas and deep bruising to her neck, which suggested strangulation. Her injuries were consistent with her head being battered into the foyer floor. This led investigators to believe that her head had been smashed into the sharp edges of the baseboard molding of the home. Police found blood under Leslie's fingernails and bruising on her arms, suggesting she had fought her attacker fiercely. Her body was found in the shower of her primary bedroom, where investigators believe her killer had carried her from the foyer so he could wash away the blood and prevent further bleeding in the home. The killer tried to clean up the crime scene. A luminescence test revealed additional evidence of blood in the foyer, and in a trash can, as well as in sinks in the kitchen, and in the downstairs bathroom, and on door frames and the back of the bedroom door. The horrific crime left the close-knit community in a state of shock and disbelief. In the days after the murder, police took as much evidence as they could, which included processing the scene for fingerprints, swabbing suspected blood samples, taking photographs, and vacuuming the foyer area for hairs and other artifacts. But due to the limited DNA technology at the time, no suspects were ever identified. Neighbors said they had not seen anything unusual on the day Leslie was killed, and her husband Carl was ruled out using samples of his own blood. With no leads nor suspects, the case eventually went cold. In 2022, police submitted the DNA collected from the bloody crime scene to Othram. Utilizing funds collected from both private and public donations, both of which are key in solving cold crimes, Othram was able to develop a DNA profile for the killer. The DNA profile soon yielded a common surname for the suspect, Gilgore. On June 4, 2024, police uncovered an old tip submitted back in 2002 about someone named Eugene Gilgore. The tipster, a previous neighbor of Gilgore's, said that he thought that he may be somehow related to the Leslie Prieur murder. He was 21 when the killing occurred. At that time, he was neither interviewed nor swapped for DNA. With this new information in hand, detectives waited at Dulles International Airport as Eugene Gilgore opened the water bottle, drank from it, and threw it away. Only after Gilgore had moved on did detectives grab the bottle. His DNA was extracted from the water bottle and tested with DNA found at the crime scene. It was a clear match. Eugene Gilgore was charged with first-degree murder and was arrested in Washington, D.C. on June 18, 2024. Gilgore had an extensive criminal history, including weapons possession and driving under the influence, as well as theft. It was found that Gilgore had actually dated Leslie's daughter, Lauren, for 5 years. They had begun dating when they were in high school. Gilgore grew up in the same neighborhood as the Priors and their families were acquainted. Leslie's daughter, Lauren, said that in the 5 years they dated, she watched Gilgore struggle with his parents' divorce and knew that certain relatives of his had volatile tempers, but she said she never experienced violence with him personally, nor did she suspect that he was capable of it. Lauren said that her mom always talked fondly of Gilgore, and that it was her dad who insisted over and over again, "Lauren, there is something off about him." Lauren said that they broke up 5 years later after trying for a long-distance relationship for more than 2 years. She said that at the time of her mother's murder, they had been separated for 3 years. Lauren said she ran into Eugene a few times after her mother's murder. She said she never noticed anything out of the ordinary, however. The most recent sighting of Gilgore was in 2023 when Lauren encountered him at a restaurant after a memorial service for a mutual friend. Lauren mentioned that they spoke one-on-one, but her mother did not come up in the conversation. Unfortunately, Lauren's father, Carl Prieur, passed away from septic shock in 2017 and was never able to see justice served for his wife's murder. Authorities have yet to determine a clear motive for the killing. However, a judge has denied Gilgore's request for bond, keeping him in custody as the case continues. Moving on to the next case. Mandy Stavik. On the day after Thanksgiving in 1989, Mandy Stavik went for a jog after returning home for her Thanksgiving break from Central Washington University. It was a normal day in Acme, a small town where people felt safe, and doors were often left unlocked. However, Mandy never returned from her jog. Her sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through the quiet community, and despite extensive searches and efforts by authorities, no sign of her was found. Mandy's case remains unsolved, adding another layer of mystery to the unresolved tragedy that already loomed over her family, as her brother Brent's murder remained a cold case. Normally Mandy would jog while her mother Mary would be riding her bicycle next to her. Mary's sister was visiting, however, so Mandy went to jog with the family's German shepherd named Kira. While Mandy was running, her brother Lee saw her through a window on her way back home. He was visiting a friend named Jeremy. Mandy did not return home, however. 2 hours after she left, the dog showed up at the house with no sign of Mandy. Mary was now worried and called Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender. Rick told Mary that he had no idea where Mandy was, unfortunately. Mary called the sheriff and everyone else she could think of. Soon lots of residents began searching for Mandy. She had been wearing a light-colored sweatshirt, green sweatpants, light blue running shoes with purple stripe, and was listening to a Walkman when she vanished. The initial suspect was Rick Zender. He had been dating Mandy for 3.5 years at that time. Their relationship was described as on again off again. The police found him to be very eager to help and decided to let him go since they had no evidence that he was involved. 2 days after Mandy disappeared, green sweatpants was found by a search and rescue team. Mary told them she didn't believe it belonged to Mandy, but they sent it in for testing anyways. The sweatpants were never positively connected to Mandy. The next day, Mandy Stavich's body was found nearly 6 miles from her house in the Nooksack River. She was only wearing her shoes and socks. Her autopsy that was then revealed that the cause of death was asphyxia by drowning. The pool of water she was in was very shallow, so it was strange to investigators that a strong swimmer such as Mandy would have drowned. There was also an injury on her head that a medical examiner said could have knocked her out. The police took DNA from Mandy's body. They were able to obtain a DNA profile from both Mandy and an unknown man. There was no one in their database had matched the DNA, unfortunately. The police followed up on over 7,000 leads throughout the next few years, but it always ended up in a dead end. In 2009, Detective Kevin Bohe came up with the idea to test the DNA of every male that lived in Acme in 1989. Since it was such a small town, it could actually be done. They started making a list of everyone that lived in Acme in 1989. For the next 4 years they analyzed several DNA samples from residents, which did not provide a match. In 2013, they started to look at Timothy Bass. He lived on the same road as Mandy Stavik. Timothy also attended the same school as she did, and his younger brother Tom was friends with Mandy. Another key point was that Mandy would be running past his house every day when she was not at university. When investigators went to his house to ask if he would give him a voluntary DNA sample, he refused. When asked if he heard about the Mandy Stavik case, he said he did not. This seemed very odd for investigators since Mandy's case was very well known in their small community. In January 1990, Timothy Bass married Gina Malone and moved to Everson, about 19 miles north of Acme. He then had 3 children, and Timothy became a delivery driver at a France bakery outlet. Timothy's wife Gina was also questioned. She said that her husband was very controlling. When they watched true crime shows, Timothy would always say how stupid people was for getting caught, and how he never would if he did something. All of this seems strange enough to the investigators, so they decide to go to his workplace. There they asked Kim Wagner, who was Timothy's manager, to tell them where he works every day, so they could follow him. She didn't feel like it was her place and told them that she won't be giving them any information. The investigators nevertheless tried their best to follow him, but Timothy didn't smoke, so they couldn't get a cigarette to get his DNA. A couple years later, Kim Wagner was at a bar with her husband and a few friends. The friends wanted to talk about a Mandy Salvi case and how her employee, Timothy, lived on the same street where Mandy lived. It was only then that Kim realized why the investigators wanted information about Timothy. She was now determined to help them. In 2017, she gave him a few items Timothy was using, including a water cup he had been drinking from. When investigators sent a cup for testing, they learned that the DNA retrieved from it matched the one taken from Mandy Stavic's body. At first, Timothy told police again that he had no idea about the Mandy Stavic case and hadn't even heard about her. When Timothy learned about the DNA evidence, however, he changed his story. He told them, at the end Mandy would often hook up when she was in town, and that is why his DNA was found on her body. Timothy Bass was arrested on December 12, 2017 and charged with murder in the first degree. Mary Stavich learned of the arrest on her 81st birthday. During his trial, all the witnesses said that they never saw Timothy and Mandy together, and that they didn't believe his story. Timothy's younger brother Tom and his mother both came forward claiming that Timothy wanted them to lie and cover for him. Timothy Bass was convicted of first-degree murder on May 24, 2019, after a jury found him guilty of the crime. His conviction followed revelations that his wife, Gina, had given a false alibi for him on the day of the murder, a claim she later admitted under pressure. Despite the conviction, Timothy maintained his innocence, stating, "I would first like to say that I'm 100% innocent of this crime. I wish no ill will towards anyone here, not even today, but I'm having a hard time with this." He was sentenced to 320 months in prison. Moving on to the next case. Marcia Ray. Marcia Ray, a devoted mother of two from the Yorkshire area, went missing in 1997 at the age of 38. On January 24th, she dropped her children, 9-year-old Philippa and 6-year-old Robert, off at school. They waved goodbye to their mother outside of Hookstone Chase Primary School, unaware that it would be the last time they'd see her. Her sudden disappearance left her family in a state of uncertainty, and despite ongoing investigations, the mystery surrounding her fate remains unsolved. However, her husband, 49-year-old Colin, did not report her missing. It was 10 days later, in February of 1997, that Marcia was finally listed as a missing person by her sister. Marcia's car was spotted in the days following her disappearance at the Ripley and Nid Valley Gorge Woods. Reportedly, the car was seen between 26 January 28 and stayed there for 4 days before it too disappeared. When it turned up again, it was located in Leeds. As a nurse at Harrogate District Hospital, Marcia had visited Leeds on several occasions to do training and to socialize from time to time. However, that doesn't explain how the car moved at the time when its owner was missing. When Colin was asked about it, he also claimed he had no idea how it had gotten there. Police combed the Ripley and Nid Valley Gorge Woods and the River Nid. However, there was no trace of the mother of two. A year later in May 1998, 40 officers searched the family home of Marcia, Colin, and their 2 children. They took along sniffer dogs and dug up the garden, but no new leads came of these search efforts for the missing woman. Reviewers of the case for the Cold Case Unit in 2013 have told of their belief that Marcia was murdered in 1997, on the day she went missing, and they believe that it's likely a second person helped out in covering up the murder, making it appear as a suicide by leaving the car outside of the Ripley and Mid Valley Gorge Woods. Marcia's family experienced a brief period of hope that they finally had answers when a decomposed body of a woman turned up in Yorkshire. However, this wasn't the body of the mother of two, but that of missing teenager Leanne Tiernan. When Marcia's husband, Colin, learned of this, he expressed his renewed wishes to find out the fate of his missing wife. In 2001, Colin was still living at the home he'd shared with her, and had maintained the same phone number. He'd held on to her possessions and car. It's unknown if this is still the case 18 years later, as information on the disappearance of Marcia Ray barely litters the internet. Although there is no strong evidence to point to him, an interesting theory is that Colin was somehow involved in the murder of his wife. He didn't report her missing at all, And what's stranger still is that he does not seem to have ever been a suspect or person of interest by police despite his complacency over his wife's disappearance. One source mentions that Colin claimed Marcia had changed in the days prior to her disappearance by involving herself in drugs and having extramarital affairs. But just one source mentions this, and otherwise, Marcia's family have remained silent. Whilst it's odd that the family haven't been very outspoken, it does not mean that they are guilty or involved in any way. Outside of the suspicions about Colin, there are no theories on what may have happened to Marcia. Marcia Ray's case remains unsolved, and the lack of significant media coverage surrounding her disappearance has left her family without answers. This silence surrounding the case raises concerns that a resolution may never come, leaving her loved ones to carry the burden of uncertainty. Despite the passing years, the hope for justice remains, as they continue to seek answers about what happened to Marcia on that fateful day in 1997. Moving on to the next case. Natalie Shibland. On June 10, 1971, 54-year-old Natalie Shibland was found lifeless in the basement of her Bedford, Massachusetts home by her husband, Raymond Shibland, the president of the Lexington Trust Bank. Natalie had been bound and repeatedly stabbed. The tragic discovery shocked the community, and despite initial investigations, the case went unsolved for years. Raymond and their 2 children were left to cope with the horrific loss. The mystery surrounding Natalie's death remained, leaving many questions unanswered for decades. A gag was found around her neck. It was discovered that her 1969 Chevrolet Impala was missing from their garage. Investigators found the car less than a mile from their home. The car appeared to have been intentionally wiped down to remove fingerprints, but police were able to observe and collect several latent prints from it, including one from the right rear window. Police at the time followed several leads, but unfortunately, a suspect could not be identified. Decades passed without an arrest, but in 1999, prosecutors said new FBI fingerprint technology was used. One of the fingerprints on the car matched those of Arthur Lewis Massey. When interviewed by investigators, Massey denied any involvement. Later, he claimed that he was solicited by an organized crime associate to take the life of the wife of a banker and to make the crime look like a break-in. He said that he refused the solicitation. Investigators found no evidence that Raymond Shibland was involved in a plot to end his wife's life. Throughout the years, investigators continued to look into Massey to get enough evidence for an arrest to be made. In 2019, Middlesex County District Attorney, Marion Ryan, created a cold case unit, trying to solve more cold cases, such as Natalie's. Investigators were able to find a woman who said she worked with Massey on a scheme to defraud banks in the 1990s. The woman also provided other critical information. She told investigators that Massey always carried a knife around and bragged that he took someone's life with a knife. That information, along with other facts of the case, was presented to Middlesex County Grand Jury. In March of 2022, he was arrested at his home in Salem, Massachusetts. He was then indicted for the crime and is expected to be arraigned soon, and it will be another step closer to a potential conviction. Bedford Police Chief Ken Fong said in a statement, "I'm hopeful that the arrest in this case will provide some closure and sense of justice for Natalie Shibland's family, as well as assurance to all in our community who were shocked by this brutal crime." Massey's daughter, Candace, said that she had not spoken to her father in 30 years. "If it's true, it's absolutely disgusting," she said. "We are really sorry for the family. It is shocking to hear this happen 2 weeks before I was born." Massey has a long record of criminal convictions and prison sentences, has assaulted corrections officers, has twice been convicted of escape, and as recently as 2016, was convicted of violating court orders involving harassment and abuse. Moving on to the next case. Sharon Anschutz. On June 5, 2000, 54-year-old Sharon Anschutz was tragically shot and killed during a robbery at the John Butler Dry Cleaners on Easley Bridge Road in Greenville, South Carolina. Despite investigators collecting DNA evidence at the crime scene, no arrests were made, and the case eventually went cold. In 2022, The Greenville County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit reignited the investigation by re-interviewing past witnesses and seeking out new leads. The DNA evidence remained a key piece in their pursuit of justice for Sharon Anschutz. In addition, investigators looked into potential forensic evidence related to the case. On January 6, 2023, investigators closed the case after determining who they believed was the suspect, 44-year-old Roger Keith Hudgens. Officials say through interviews, investigators learned Hudgens was a local man who did various jobs around at the dry cleaners, including occasionally taking out the trash. Through speaking with witnesses, investigators learned of Hudgens' intentions to rob the business that day and, along with forensic evidence, were able to tie him to the crime. Hudgens passed away in 2008 from medical complications, meaning there will be no justice. Greenville County Sheriff Hobart Lewis said this in a press release. While no investigation will bring loved ones back, I hope that Miss Sharon Anschutz's family can find peace in knowing that the culprit was identified and no longer in a position to harm others. As the sheriff of this county, it is my unwavering intention not to rest until every one of our cold cases is solved and justice is served. I am so proud of the work and persistent dedication our team of investigators performed. My message to the community of fallen victim families is that we will never give up. Moving on to the next case. Viola Hagencourt. Viola Hagencourt, a 79-year-old woman living alone in Anaheim, California, was discovered dead in her apartment on February 18, 1980. Her neighbor, who had grown concerned after not seeing her for 2 days, entered her unit and found Viola's lifeless body. She had been assaulted and strangled. Viola was a familiar sight around her apartment complex, often seen walking the grounds, making her sudden disappearance all the more alarming. The circumstances surrounding her death raised questions, and her case remains an unsolved mystery. Over the years, detectives attempted to solve the case, pursuing new leads or bits of evidence, but failed to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. In September of 2020, the case was reopened. This time, investigators turned to genetic testing technology, which has been used to solve dozens of cold cases across the U.S. Investigators used DNA found on Viola and compared it with genetic profiles on genealogy databases. First led investigators to 64-year-old Andre William LaPierre. He was arrested on April 28, 2021 at his home in Alamogordo, New Mexico in connection to the case. He is being held without bail at an Attaro County jail. It is not believed that Andre and Viola knew each other. Viola's family had to say in a statement, "Our grandmother was a beautiful, happy soul and did not deserve being violated in her final years of life. We are so grateful for the Anaheim Police Department never giving up after 41 years. My sister was relentless and never gave up pursuing this, and that is our message, never, never give up." Andre was in his 20s at the time of the crime and lived close to Viola in Anaheim, California. Sometime in 1990s he moved east. He split his time between Arizona and New Mexico. Andre worked as a plumber and a truck driver. He married twice and had 2 children. Investigators have not yet established a motive for the crime. Moving on to the next case. William Anker Lai. William Anker Lai, born on October 19, 1910, in the United States, moved to Norway with his mother when he was 5 years old in 1916. He grew up in Oslo, which was previously known as Christiania. As a teenager, William developed an interest in agriculture, which led him to start his own wholesale business in fruits and vegetables. However, after suffering a stroke in 1969, he became depressed and his behavior changed significantly. He also started phasing out his business. On July 13, 1972, William and his wife, Rajanine, were visiting relatives on Opson Farm and Ski. They were going to stay there for a few days to help the relatives with farm operations. That night, while the family was eating dinner, William got up from the table and left the farm. His wife asked him where he was going, but William did not reply. This would be the last time that William was seen alive. Later that night, when William had still not returned, his wife called her apartment home in Oslo hoping that William had gone there. The phone rang for a bit before someone picked up the call. However, they did not say anything and remained quiet until the wife asked if it was William on the other end. William then said yes. His wife asked him when he would be returning to ski. William replied that he wasn't feeling well and was not in a condition to drive as he had just taken some pills. The call ended and his wife assumed that William would return the next day. However, he never did. When William had still not returned after 2 days, his wife and his brother went to the Oslo apartment. However, William was nowhere to be seen. Strangely enough, his wife's clothing and paintings were carefully cut up and placed on the coffee table in the living room. William was reported missing. A search investigation was launched and missing person flyers were distributed throughout the police stations in Norway. William's car, a white Vauxhall Cresta with the license plate number DA1427, was also missing. His wife told investigators that along with the car, camping equipment including folding tables, folding chairs and a few other items that were kept in the garage were also missing. In the next few days, William's information was published in newspapers and media but to no avail. 1 month later, an investigating was reading the newspaper when a report caught his eye. It mentioned that someone had found abandoned camping equipment near a lake in Nesbyen. The investigator contacted the Nesbyen police station, who sent him a list of all the items that were found near the lake. The list included a travel radio, a small outdoor table, a travel briefcase, camping chairs, a water jug, a yellow warning light, a coffee pot, a jar of strawberry jam with the handwritten words Strawberry 1971 on it, and a cover for a propane stove. The travel radio still had a sticker on it from the electronics store it was purchased from in Oslo. The police contacted the store and they told them that they had sold the radio to one William Ankerli. His wife was called in, and she was able to identify most of the items, including the jam jar which she had hand-labeled herself with the word Strawberry 1971. The police then interviewed the man who found the abandoned camping equipment and the items near the lake. He told police that he and his wife had been traveling to Vassfaret around 10 or 11 a.m. when they noticed a man sitting in his chair near the lake. They noticed that he had a camping table with a tablecloth and a thermos next to him. Later that evening, while returning back to their home and passing by the lake, they could not find the man anywhere. However, his camping equipment was still present. Finding the abandoned camping scene suspicious, they notified police. In the next few days, police would receive another tip from a business associate of Williams who claimed to have seen him somewhere along the road between Haldon and Nesbyen. He said he had been wearing a blue coat. William's family confirmed that William did have a blue coat that he kept in his car. He used to wear the coat if he needed to wash or polish his car. The police then searched the area but could not find any trace of William or his vehicle. The police, however, did not search the lake, stating that the car could not have ended up in the water as it was too shallow to hide a vehicle. With no leads, the search was soon stopped. In 1974, William was declared dead by a court and the case grew cold. In 2019, Arsted Norge, a detective show in Norway, began investigating the case. In autumn of 2021, they decided to check Lake Tridjern as that was the only place during the earlier investigation which had not been searched. A search of the lake was conducted using sonar and underwater drones. Soon an object was picked up by the sonar at around 10 meters under the water. The drone was then used to investigate, and on September 10, 2021, a car with the license plate number DA14027 was located laying vertically with the front part down in the mud in the seabed. They notified police and the car was pulled out and examined. As the car was buried in the seabed in the front, the paint was preserved and stayed as it was in 1972. The police found human remains inside the car. The remains were then sent for an autopsy and identification to Oslo University Hospital. A DNA test later confirmed that the remains did belong to William Ankerli. Investigating the car, police found several objects inside. The objects were well preserved despite the car being underwater for almost half a century. The objects included a farewell letter, a signed letter of resignation, and a few other documents. Because the objects were wrapped in plastic, they remained well preserved over the years. Tragically, William's wife and brother passed away without ever learning what had happened to him. After William's immediate family was contacted, they requested that his body be returned to his hometown of Oslo for burial. Based on the contents that were discovered, it is believed that William took his own life. After 49 years, the case was finally closed.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing unsolved mysteries with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Unsolved Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any mysteries you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video.